You're not family anymore, my aunt said after I couldn't afford her $600 wedding gift. 2 years later, she called crying because her son wanted a job at my company. My Aunt Carol always said that blood was just blood, but family was a choice. It was one of her favorite little aphorisms, usually delivered with a pointed look in my direction over a holiday dinner table. For years, I thought she meant it as a compliment, a way of saying that even though she'd only married into the family, she had chosen us. I didn't understand until her wedding day that it was never a promise. It was a threat. She wasn't choosing to let us in. She was deciding who to cut out. And on that crisp October afternoon, surrounded by blush pink roses and the cloying scent of buttercream, she chose me. The crime that got me excommunicated wasn't some grand betrayal. It was 60 square inches of watercolor paper, a painting of the lake where my Uncle Ben had proposed to her, framed in simple, reclaimed barnwood. It was my gift. It was heartfelt. It was personal. And it was, most damningly, not the $600 crystal ice bucket listed on her registry. The confrontation didn't happen in a quiet corner. Carol was never one for subtlety. She waited until the champagne toast was over and the band had started their first set, a saccharine cover of a song I knew for a fact my uncle despised. She found me near the bar, trying to summon the courage to switch my club soda for something that would burn a little more. I was 6 months sober, a fragile, rickety milestone that felt more like a tightrope walk than solid ground. She glided toward me, a vision in ivory silk, her smile as sharp and brilliant as the diamonds on her hand. Her eyes, however, were cold stones. She didn't even glance at the bartender as she held up a hand to stop him from taking my order. "Maya, darling," she began, her voice a low purr that still managed to cut through the music. "I just finished opening the table gifts. So many lovely things." She paused, letting the silence stretch. I knew what was coming. I could feel the familiar shame coiling in my stomach, the same shame that had been my constant companion for years. "I saw your contribution, the little painting." She said the word painting like it was something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. "It's very quaint." I tried to smile to pretend I didn't feel the 100 tiny cuts her tone inflicted. "I'm glad you liked it. I thought it would be meaningful." "Meaningful," she repeated, tasting the word. "That's one word for it. Another might be cheap." The smile finally dropped from her face, replaced by a look of profound, theatrical disappointment. "You know, when Ben and I put together our registry, we did it to make things easy for our guests, to ensure we received items of a certain quality, a standard. That ice bucket, for instance. It wasn't just an ice bucket, Maya. It was a symbol of the life we are building, a life of quality." My throat felt tight. The room was spinning slightly, the laughter and music blurring into a dull roar. "Carol, I'm sorry. Things have been tight. I thought something personal. Things have been tight for you for a decade, haven't they?" She snapped, her voice no longer a purr but a hiss. People were starting to look. I could feel their eyes on us. Always some drama, some excuse. First the rehabs, then the debt. Now you show up to my wedding, the most important day of my life, with a piece of arts and crafts you probably whipped up in an afternoon, and you expect me to be grateful? She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Your uncle has been so patient with you. We've all been so patient. But this is a slap in the face. It shows a complete lack of respect, not just for me, but for this family." She leaned in closer, her perfume suffocating me. "I told Ben that family is a choice. It's about who shows up, who supports you, who respects the standards you set for your life. You have made it very clear today that you don't meet that standard. You are not a part of the family we are building." She straightened up, smoothing down the front of her perfect dress. "As far as I'm concerned, you're not family anymore. Enjoy the party. It's the last one you'll be invited to." And with that, she turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd of adoring guests, leaving me standing alone at the bar, feeling smaller and more broken than I had in a very long time. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to run. I wanted to drink. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just stood there frozen as the band played on. My Uncle Ben caught my eye from across the room. He was standing next to his new bride, a strained smile plastered on his face. He gave me a helpless little shrug, a silent apology that did nothing to quell the firestorm in my gut. He was choosing her. He had made his choice. I didn't leave right away. Part of it was paralysis, the sheer shock of her cruelty. Another part was a stubborn refusal to be chased out. I retreated to a shadowy alcove near the back of the reception hall, a small sitting area with overstuffed chairs, partially hidden by a large potted ficus. I sank into one of the chairs, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself invisible. I told myself I would stay for 10 more minutes, just to prove I could, and then I would slip out unnoticed. The club soda sat untouched on the table beside me. The desire for a real drink was a living thing inside me, a cornered animal snarling and clawing at the walls of its cage. I focused on my breathing, the way my sponsor taught me. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. It was from this hiding place that I became an unwilling audience to the second and far more terrifying act of Carol's wedding day performance. She and her maid of honor, a woman named Tiffany with equally sharp eyes, settled into the chairs on the other side of the ficus. They must have thought the alcove was empty. They were speaking in low, conspiratorial tones, but in the cavernous, echoing hall, their voices carried. "He looks absolutely dreadful," Tiffany said, and I heard the clink of a champagne flute. "Are you sure you didn't overdo it this week?" "Please," Carol scoffed. "I know exactly what I'm doing. A little extra fatigue, a bit of confusion. It just makes him more compliant, and it helps sell the narrative for later. Poor Ben. His health health has been failing for months. Everyone here is a witness. She laughed, a low, triumphant sound. Look at him. He can barely stand through a 2-minute conversation. By the time we get back from the honeymoon, he'll be ready to sign over the durable power of attorney without a second thought. My blood ran cold. I stopped breathing. They weren't talking about the stress of the wedding. This was something else, something calculated. It's just so risky, Carol, Tiffany whispered. The new supplements. What if a doctor tests for it? They won't, Carol said with absolute certainty. They'll test for the usual things. Thyroid, vitamin deficiencies, maybe early onset dementia. They won't look for a custom compounded herbal blend that mimics the symptoms of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. It's undetectable unless you know exactly what to screen for. And why would they? He's a man in his late 50s with a history of high blood pressure and a stressful job. His decline is, for all intents and purposes, perfectly plausible. I've been documenting his symptoms for months. The groundwork is laid. My mind reeled, frantically connecting dots I hadn't even seen before. Uncle Ben's constant exhaustion over the past year, which he'd blamed on work, his increasing forgetfulness, which Carol had loudly lamented to anyone who would listen, his dizzy spells, his joint pain. She hadn't been caring for him. She had been curating his illness. And the financials? Tiffany asked. All lined up, Carol purred. Once I have power of attorney, I'll start consolidating the assets. Move his personal investments into our new joint accounts. The prenup protects his existing property, but anything he gifts me or moves into a joint holding after the wedding is 50% mine. And once he's declared legally incompetent to manage his own affairs, well, I become the sole trustee of the family estate your dear departed sister left him. Imagine, all that money finally being managed by someone who knows what to do with it. My mother. She was talking about my mother's inheritance, the money she had left for Ben, her beloved younger brother, to ensure he was always taken care of. A knot of pure, unadulterated rage tightened in my chest, so fierce it almost choked me. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. Carol wasn't just marrying my uncle. She was systematically dismantling his life, his health, and my mother's legacy, all while wearing a white dress and smiling for pictures. The fight over the wedding gift suddenly seemed so laughably insignificant, a deliberate piece of theater designed to isolate me and discredit me before I could ever become a threat. She wasn't just cutting me out. She was preemptively neutralizing me. I stayed hidden in that chair for what felt like an eternity, my heart hammering against my ribs. My sobriety, so fragile just moments before, was now a shield of cold, hard clarity. The craving for alcohol vanished, replaced by a singular chilling focus. She thought I was a broken, unstable drunk. She thought I was weak. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Not anymore. As she and Tiffany got up and walked away, their laughter echoing behind them, I made a vow. I would not let this happen. I would save my uncle, and I would burn her world to the ground. Getting out of that reception hall was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every instinct screamed at me to run to Ben, to shake him, to tell him his wife was poisoning him, but Carol's words echoed in my head. Everyone here is a witness. If I made a scene, she would be proven right. I'd be the hysterical, jealous niece, likely drunk, causing trouble at her wedding. I would be discredited before I even began. So, I forced myself to move slowly, deliberately. I walked out of the alcove, kept my head down, and headed for the exit, avoiding the dance floor, avoiding any possibility of eye contact with Ben or Carol. As I reached the grand double doors, I felt a hand on my arm. I flinched, spinning around, my heart leaping into my throat. It was my other uncle, Robert, my father's older brother. He was a retired cop, a man of few words and a perpetually skeptical expression. His face was a mask of concern. Maya, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. The words tumbled out of me in a frantic, choked whisper. She's hurting him, Uncle Robert. Carol, she's poisoning him. I heard her. She was talking to her friend. It's all a plan. The wedding, his sickness, the money. I knew how I sounded. I sounded exactly like the unhinged person Carol wanted everyone to believe I was. Robert held up a hand, his expression unreadable. Whoa, slow down, kid. Poisoning him? That's a hell of an accusation. What did you hear exactly? He steered me away from the door, toward a quieter hallway leading to the restrooms. I recounted the conversation I'd overheard, my voice trembling but gaining strength as I repeated Carol's own cold, clinical words. Durable power of attorney, legally incompetent, custom compounded herbal blend. I told him everything. When I finished, I searched his face, desperate for a sign of belief. He was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Carol is a piece of work, he said finally, his voice low. I've never trusted her. She's always been too slick, too interested in what Ben has, not who he is. But this is a whole other level. He scrubbed a hand over his face. You're sure you heard this? You're clear-headed? It wasn't an accusation, but a genuine question. He knew my history. I am 100% sober, Uncle Robert, I said, my voice firm, meeting his gaze directly. I swear on my life. She thinks I'm a mess. She thinks I'm not a threat. She said it all because she thought no one was listening. He nodded slowly. Okay, I believe you. The relief that washed over me was so immense my knees almost buckled. But you were right not to cause a scene. She's smart. She's been planning this. We have to be smarter. He looked back toward the reception hall. For now, you go home. Don't call Ben. Don't text her. Don't do anything. Let her think her little public shaming worked. Let her think you've crawled back into a hole. I'll keep an eye on things here. We'll talk tomorrow. We need a plan. His calm, authoritative presence was a lifeline. He was right. A direct confrontation would fail. This had to be a quiet war, fought in the shadows she thought she owned. He walked me to my car, a silent, solid presence at my side. As I got in, he put a hand hand on the door. Maya, be careful. If what you're saying is true, this woman is dangerous. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. Driving away from the wedding venue, the manicured lawns and twinkling lights felt like a facade, a beautiful stage for a horror show. The fight of my life had just begun. The next morning, the silence in my tiny apartment was deafening. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night pacing, replaying Carol's words over and over, the cold venom in her voice a permanent echo in my ears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my uncle's face at the wedding, pale, tired, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. How could I have not seen it? The signs had all been there, hiding in plain sight, obscured by Carol's constant narrative of concern. I felt a surge of guilt, hot and sharp. While I had been wrapped up in my own recovery, my own struggles, she had been weaving her web around him. My first call wasn't to Uncle Robert, it was to my sponsor, David. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. When he answered, I just broke down. I want a drink, I sobbed, the words tearing out of me. God, I want one so badly. I don't know how to do this. David listened patiently, his voice a calm anchor in my storm. He didn't offer platitudes. He just let me pour out the whole sordid story, the humiliation, the overheard conversation, the terror, the rage. Okay, he said when I was finally spent. Breathe. You're not going to drink today, Maya. You know why? Because that's exactly what she would expect. That's what she wants. Your weakness is her weapon. But you're not weak. You're sober. You're clear. You are the one person who knows the truth. You can't do this for your uncle if you're not sober. He was right. My sobriety wasn't a liability. It was my superpower. It was the one thing Carol hadn't counted on. We talked for almost an hour, not about Carol or Ben, but about my recovery, about grounding techniques, about taking things one moment at a time. By the time I hung up, the frantic, desperate craving had subsided, replaced by a cold, resolute calm. I could do this, one step at a time. The first step was a legal pad and a pen. I started writing. I created a timeline beginning a year ago when I first noticed Ben starting to seem off. I documented every instance I could remember of him complaining about fatigue, of Carol mentioning his forgetfulness, of canceled family plans because Ben wasn't feeling up to it. I wrote down the conversation I'd overheard at the wedding, word for word, as best as I could remember. I saved the texts from Carol from the past few months, the ones where she'd lament Ben's declining health while also subtly bragging about a new piece of jewelry or a weekend spa trip. Each entry was a small, ugly brick in the wall she had built around him. When Uncle Robert called that afternoon, I was ready. I've been thinking, he said, his voice grim. We need a professional. This is out of our league. I have a name, a lawyer. Her name is Jessica Albright. She specializes in elder law, specifically financial abuse and exploitation cases. She's tough as nails. I think you should call her. He gave me the number, and I stared at it for a full minute before dialing. My heart pounded as I explained the situation to the paralegal, feeling the insanity of my own words. Yes, I believe my aunt is medically gaslighting and slowly poisoning my uncle to gain control of his estate. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie, but Jessica Albright agreed to see me the next day. Walking into her office was like stepping into a different world. It was sleek, modern, and radiated an aura of calm competence. Jessica was in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found instantly reassuring. I sat across from her polished mahogany desk and told her everything, starting with the wedding and working my way backward. I handed her the legal pad with my timeline. She listened without interruption, her expression neutral, occasionally making a note. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Your aunt is either a master manipulator or you have a very active imagination, she said, her tone blunt but not unkind. My job is to figure out which it is. She tapped her pen on my timeline. What you've described, the gradual onset of vague symptoms, the social isolation of the victim, the character assassination of potential allies, the careful financial planning, it's a classic pattern of coercive control and predatory marriage. The herbal supplement part is a nasty twist, but the framework is textbook. So you believe me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I believe your story is credible enough to investigate, she corrected, but belief doesn't win in court. Evidence does. Right now, all we have is your word, which your aunt has already taken steps to discredit, and a second-hand account of a conversation. It's not enough. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. This will be a long, expensive, and ugly fight. She will try to destroy you. She will use your past addiction, your financial situation, every vulnerability you have, and she will paint you as a greedy, vindictive liar. Are you prepared for that? I thought of my uncle's tired face. I thought of my mother's legacy. I thought of Carol's triumphant, mocking laughter. Yes, I said, my voice clear and steady. I'm prepared. Good, Jessica said, a flicker of a smile on her lips. Then let's get to work. First, we need to establish a baseline. We need to find out what exactly she's giving him, and we need to get a look at their finances. Both of those things will require a court order. And to get a court order, we need more than just your testimony. The first salvo from Carol's side came less than a week later. It was a formal-looking envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a letter from a high-powered law firm, the kind with names that sounded like old money and mahogany. It was a cease and desist letter. It accused me of a campaign of harassment against Mrs. Carol Masters and her husband, Benjamin Masters. It cited my disruptive behavior at the wedding and subsequent slanderous communications. It demanded I immediately stop all contact and warned that any further action would be met with swift legal proceedings, including a suit for defamation and a restraining order. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. She was already twisting the narrative, creating a paper trail to paint me as the aggressor. I immediately called Jessica. "It's a scare tactic," she said calmly after I read it to her. "Standard procedure for this kind of playbook. She knows you're talking to people. She wants to shut you down before you can get organized. Don't respond. Let me handle it." But Carol didn't stop with legal threats. She started a full-scale war within the family. My phone began to ring with calls from cousins and aunts I hadn't spoken to in months. The stories were all variations on the same theme. Carol called me, "So worried about you, Maya. She said you had a terrible relapse at the wedding and made a scene. She's worried you're after Ben's money now that you're in debt again." Each call was a fresh wound. These were people who had known me my whole life, who had watched me fight my way back to sobriety. Yet it was so easy for them to believe Carol's carefully crafted lies. It was easier to believe I was the problem, the familiar black sheep, than to confront the terrifying possibility that the charming, sophisticated woman who had married into their family was a monster. I stopped answering the phone. The sense of isolation was crushing. It was me and Uncle Robert against the world, and I could feel the family closing ranks, not around Ben, but around his captor. The rock-bottom moment came about a month after the wedding. Uncle Robert had managed to have a brief supervised lunch with Ben. Carol had insisted on being there. Robert told me Ben looked worse than ever, thinner, more confused, his hands trembling. He said Carol had answered most of the questions for him, patting his hand and telling Robert how they were managing his condition as best they could. The visit had yielded nothing but more despair. That night, I received a formal notice. Carol had filed for an emergency temporary restraining order against me, claiming I was stalking her and causing her extreme emotional distress. There was a hearing scheduled for the following week. The petition was filled with vicious, twisted half-truths. That I had shown up to the wedding uninvited. I had an invitation. That I had become belligerent and threatening when confronted about my inappropriate behavior. She had humiliated me. And that I had been making incessant, harassing phone calls. I hadn't called once. It was a masterpiece of fiction. I remember sitting on my floor, the papers spread out around me, and just feeling empty. She was winning. She was outmaneuvering me at every turn. The legal fees were already piling up, draining my meager savings. My family thought I was crazy. The system was being used against me. The sheer weight of it all felt insurmountable. The little voice in my head, the one that always whispered my worst fears, was screaming now. "She's right. You are a mess. You're a failure. You can't win this. You can't even take care of yourself. How can you possibly save him?" My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and for a terrifying moment, I looked at the window and thought about how easy it would be to just make it all stop. The thought was so clear and so seductive that it jolted me. I scrambled for my phone and called David, my sponsor. I couldn't even speak. I was just sobbing. He didn't need me to. "Stay on the phone with me, Maya," he said, his voice firm. "Just stay on the phone. Where are your shoes? Put on your shoes. We're going to a meeting." I sat in the back of that church basement, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee, and listened to other people share their stories of hitting rock bottom, of feeling hopeless and alone. And slowly, agonizingly, the fog began to lift. I wasn't alone. This feeling, this despair, it was part of the disease of addiction, a disease Carol was deliberately trying to trigger in me. She was using my own illness as a weapon, and the thought of letting her win, of letting her use my struggle to destroy me and my uncle, sparked a new kind of fire. It wasn't the hot, chaotic rage I'd felt before. It was a cold, hard, diamond-bright fury. I would not let her break me. I would use the same tools I used to get sober: honesty, perseverance, and a refusal to give up, no matter how hopeless it seemed. I left that meeting not feeling cured, but feeling armed. The battle wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more brutal phase. The restraining order hearing was a humiliating ordeal. Carol arrived looking like a grieving victim, dressed in a somber gray suit, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Her lawyer was slick and aggressive. I sat beside Jessica, my hands clenched in my lap, trying to project a calm I did not feel. Carol's lawyer painted a picture of me as an unstable, drug-addicted parasite, obsessed with my uncle's money. He brought up my rehab stays. He brought up my past debts. He twisted the story of the wedding gift into an act of calculated malice. When I took the stand, he was relentless. "Miss Evans, isn't it true you have a history of substance abuse? Isn't it true you are currently unemployed and have significant personal debt? Isn't it true that your Uncle Ben has had to bail you out financially on multiple occasions?" With every question, he was building a case that I was not a concerned niece, but a desperate grifter. Jessica did her best to counter. She framed my sobriety not as a history of failure, but as a testament to my strength. She pointed out the inconsistencies in Carol's story, but we had no hard evidence. It was my word against Carol's carefully constructed narrative. The judge, a weary-looking woman who seemed to have seen it all, listened impassively. In the end, she granted a temporary restraining order. It wasn't the full stay-away order Carol wanted, but a modified one. I was forbidden from contacting Carol or Ben, and from coming within 100 yards of their home. Walking out of the courthouse felt like a profound defeat. Carol swept past me, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "This is for your own good, Maya," she whispered, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Get the help you need." It was a performance for the benefit of anyone watching. I just stared straight ahead, my jaw tight. Jessica put a hand on my shoulder. "This is not a loss," she said firmly. "It's a hurdle. She thinks she's won. She thinks she's shut you down. This is when we go on the offense. Now we have grounds to file our own motion. We're going to petition the court for a wellness check and a full accounting of Ben's assets." Her legal aggression just just opened the door for us. Jessica was a brilliant strategist. She used Carol's restraining order as the centerpiece of our own filing. We argued that the order was not a protective measure, but a tool of isolation, designed to prevent me from monitoring my uncle's rapidly declining health. We attached my timeline, Uncle Robert's sworn affidavit, corroborating his own observations of Ben's deterioration and Carol's controlling behavior, and a detailed summary of my overheard conversation. We weren't asking for the restraining order to be lifted. We were asking for the court to intervene on Ben's behalf. We were formally alleging undue influence and demanding a court-appointed guardian ad litem to investigate the situation. The next few months were a slow, agonizing grind of legal procedure. Motions, counter-motions, affidavits, and discovery requests. It was a war fought by paper. Carol's legal team did everything they could to block us, arguing that Ben was a private citizen whose medical and financial privacy was being violated by a disgruntled relative. They produced a letter, signed by Ben, stating that he was fine, that his wife was taking wonderful care of him, and that he wanted me to leave them alone. The signature was shaky, almost illegible. It broke my heart. Our first small victory came when the judge, the same one from the restraining order hearing, agreed to appoint a guardian ad litem, GAL. Her name was Sarah Chen, a social worker turned lawyer with a reputation for being thorough and impartial. Sarah's job was to act as the court's eyes and ears, to investigate our claims and make a recommendation in the best interest of my uncle. Sarah's investigation was methodical. She interviewed me for hours. She interviewed Uncle Robert. She interviewed the cousins and family members Carol had poisoned against me. She conducted a supervised visit at Ben and Carol's home. Carol, of course, was the perfect hostess, the doting wife. She had a binder full of documentation, a log of Ben's symptoms, articles on fibromyalgia, printouts from alternative health websites. But Sarah was trained to see past the performance. As she told Jessica later, she noted how Carol consistently spoke for Ben, how he seemed disoriented and deferred to his wife on every question, and how there were no actual medical records from a licensed physician, only from a naturopathic consultant Carol had found online. The real turning point, the evidentiary breakthrough we had been praying for, came from a place none of us expected. Jessica had decided to dig into the naturopath Carol was so fond of. A simple background check revealed he had a history of peddling sham treatments and had been censured in another state for practicing medicine without a license. That wasn't the bombshell, though. The bombshell was that his primary business was not naturopathy, but the online sale of rare and exotic botanical compounds. Armed with this information, Jessica went back to the judge. She argued that there was now probable cause to believe Ben was being exposed to unregulated and potentially harmful substances. She filed an emergency motion for a full medical evaluation by a court-appointed physician and a comprehensive toxicology screening. Carol's lawyers fought it furiously, calling it a witch hunt, but the information about the quack naturopath was enough. The judge granted the motion. Getting the samples was the next hurdle. Ben had to be brought to a neutral medical facility. Carol was legally required to comply, but she could still be present. The order specified blood, urine, and hair samples. The hair was the most critical. Unlike blood or urine, which only show recent exposure, a hair sample can create a timeline of substances ingested over months. It could be the physical proof of everything I'd overheard. I wasn't allowed to be there because of the restraining order. Uncle Robert went. He described the scene to me later. Carol was a nervous wreck, her mask of calm finally cracking. She kept trying to interrupt the nurses, questioning their procedures. Ben was docile and confused, like a man in a fog. Robert said the hardest part was watching the nurse take a small snippet of hair from the back of Ben's head. It felt like such a small, simple act, but everything was riding on it. The wait for the results was excruciating. It was 2 weeks of sleepless nights and constant anxiety. I threw myself into freelance work, taking on any project I could get, just to keep my mind busy and pay the mounting legal bills. My little graphic design business, which I'd started as a side hustle, was suddenly my entire focus. It was the one part of my life I could control. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was Jessica. I could hear the excitement in her voice. "We got it, Maya. We got her." The toxicology report was devastatingly clear. It identified elevated levels of a specific alkaloid, a compound derived from a rare South American plant. On its own, in small doses, it was sometimes used in unregulated herbal remedies for fatigue, but the report showed a consistent, cumulative buildup over a period of at least 6 months. The forensic toxicologist's summary was chilling. At the levels present in my uncle's system, the compound would induce symptoms that perfectly mimicked a severe autoimmune disorder: chronic fatigue, cognitive fog, joint pain, muscle weakness, and eventually, if continued, it would lead to organ failure. It was a slow, quiet, and easily misdiagnosed way to kill someone. But that wasn't all. While we waited for the tox report, Jessica's forensic accountant had finally gotten access to Ben's financial records. The analysis revealed a systematic pattern. Small, seemingly insignificant transfers from Ben's personal accounts to a new joint account had started 6 months ago. But in the weeks following the wedding, the amounts had escalated dramatically. 2 large withdrawals, totaling over $200,000, had been moved to a private investment account solely in Carol's name. We had it all: the motive, the means, the evidence. The overheard conversation was no longer the ranting of a hysterical niece. It was the Rosetta Stone that explained the whole damn thing. The case was no longer just a civil matter of undue influence. Jessica immediately turned the entire file over to the district attorney's office. Carol wasn't just going to lose control of Ben's money, she was going to prison. The wheels of the criminal justice system turned slowly, but now they were turning inexorably toward Carol. The district attorney filed charges: financial elder abuse, grand larceny, and, to our immense relief, attempted murder. The evidence was too compelling to ignore. The combination of the toxicology report, the financial audit, and my testimony about her confession was a powerful trifecta. Carol was arrested at her home. I wasn't there, but Uncle Robert was, along with the police. He said she didn't scream or fight. She just became very, very still, her face a mask of cold fury. As they put her in the back of the patrol car, she locked eyes with him. "She'll pay for this," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You all will." The months leading up to the trial were a strange mix of terror and vindication. Carol was out on bail, a sum her expensive lawyers had managed to get reduced. She was living in the house still, though a temporary court order had granted Uncle Robert medical and financial power of attorney for Ben, who was now in a full-time care facility, beginning the long, slow process of detoxification. The poison had done significant damage. His doctors were cautiously optimistic, but warned that some of the cognitive and neurological effects might be permanent. My life became a series of meetings, with Jessica for the ongoing civil case, with the assistant district attorney, a sharp, focused woman named Maria Flores, and with my therapist, who was helping me prepare for the ordeal of testifying. We practiced grounding techniques, feeling my feet on the floor, focusing on my breath to keep me from getting overwhelmed on the stand. We talked through the attacks that Carol's defense team would inevitably launch against me. The goal was not to make me invincible, but to make me resilient. The trial began in the spring, nearly a year and a half after the wedding. Walking into that courtroom felt surreal. It was packed with family. On one side sat Uncle Robert, a few loyal cousins, and me. On the other side sat a larger contingent: Carol's son from her first marriage, Kevin, and the family members who had bought her story, their faces a mixture of confusion and defiance. They were there to support her. In the middle was the press, drawn by the salacious details of the case: the socialite wife, the slow poisoning, the family fortune. Carol sat at the defense table, looking impeccable and poised. She looked like a woman attending a charity luncheon, not a defendant on trial for attempted murder. Seeing her there, so calm and confident, sent a jolt of fear through me. For a moment, I doubted everything. What if she got away with it? The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision. Maria Flores was brilliant. She started with the doctors from the care facility, who testified about Ben's condition upon arrival and his slow improvement once he was no longer being cared for by his wife. Then came the forensic toxicologist, who explained the science of the poison in clear, simple terms, using charts to show the buildup in Ben's hair samples over time. The forensic accountant followed, detailing the transfer of funds with spreadsheets and bank records that were impossible to refute. My turn on the stand was the moment I had been dreading and preparing for all these months. Maria walked me through my story gently, from my relationship with my uncle to the events of the wedding. When I recounted the conversation I had overheard, the courtroom was silent. I spoke calmly, sticking to the facts, just as we had rehearsed. Then came the cross-examination. Carol's lawyer, Mr. Davies, approached me like a predator circling its prey. His strategy was exactly what we'd predicted: character assassination. For 2 brutal hours, he dragged me through the mud of my past. "Miss Evans, you have a documented history of lying to your family to support your drug habit, correct? You were, by your own admission, in a fragile emotional state on the day of the wedding. Isn't that right? You were angry with Mrs. Masters, weren't you? Angry that she had called you out for your cheap gift? Angry that she was setting boundaries you didn't like? Is it possible, Miss Evans, that in your anger and your fragile state, you imagined this conversation? That you twisted some innocent remarks into something sinister to get back at the woman who had embarrassed you?" With every question, I felt a flicker of the old shame, the old self-doubt. But then I would look at Maria, who would give me a slight, imperceptible nod. I would take a breath, feel my feet on the floor. "No," I would answer, my voice steady. "That is not what happened. I refused to be baited. I refused to get emotional. I simply repeated my truth." When Davies finally dismissed me, I walked back to my seat, emotionally exhausted but intact. I had not broken. The most dramatic moment of the trial, however, was not my testimony. It was Carol's. Against her lawyer's advice, she insisted on taking the stand. She believed she could charm the jury, just as she had charmed everyone else. It was a fatal miscalculation. On direct examination, she was brilliant. She was a grieving, terrified wife, horrified by the accusations against her. She cried. She spoke of her deep love for Ben, her fear for his failing health. She painted me as a troubled, vindictive niece who had concocted a fantasy to ruin her happiness. But on cross-examination, Maria Flores dismantled her piece by piece. She didn't attack. She just asked simple, quiet questions, armed with a mountain of evidence. "Mrs. Masters, you claim you were only giving your husband supplements recommended by your naturopath. Can you explain why you never once took him to a licensed medical doctor for his severe symptoms? Can you explain this transfer of $200,000 to your private account, made just 3 days after you obtained the login information for your husband's primary brokerage account? Mrs. Masters, you testified that you were terrified by your husband's illness. Can you tell the jury why, during the month he was at his sickest, your credit card statements show you spent over $20,000 on jewelry, designer clothes, and spa treatments?" With each question, a crack appeared in Carol's perfect facade. Her answer answers became defensive, then evasive, then openly hostile. The charm evaporated, revealing the cold, hard avarice beneath. The final blow came when Maria projected the naturopath's website on the screen, showing the exact herbal blend for sale, the one that matched the compound found in Ben's system. "Did you purchase this, Mrs. Masters?" Maria asked quietly. Carol stared at the screen, her face pale. I may have bought some things from his site, for general wellness." "Did you buy this specific compound, which the toxicologist testified would over time lead to organ failure?" "I am not a doctor," Carol snapped, her voice rising. "I was just trying to help my husband. This is a witch hunt. She's a liar." She pointed at me, her face contorted with rage, and in that moment, the jury saw her. Not the grieving wife, but the woman I had heard in the alcove, the woman who had stood over my uncle's slow-motion murder plot, gloating. She had convicted herself. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict: guilty of financial elder abuse, guilty of grand larceny. On the charge of attempted murder, they found her guilty of a lesser included offense, felony endangerment. It was a victory, but a bittersweet one. The attempted murder conviction was the one I had wanted most. It felt like the only charge that truly encompassed the depth of her malice. Jessica explained later that juries are often hesitant to convict on attempted murder without a smoking gun confession, and Carol's outburst while damning wasn't quite that. The endangerment charge, however, carried a significant sentence. At the sentencing hearing a month later, the judge was scathing. She spoke of the calculated cruelty, the profound breach of trust. She sentenced Carol to the maximum allowed for the combined charges: 8 years in state prison. 8 years. It felt like a lifetime, and yet not nearly enough for trying to steal a man's life. As they led her away, she looked at me one last time. There was no remorse in her eyes, only pure, undiluted hatred. 2 years passed. Life, as it does, went on, but it was a new kind of life, one that I had built myself from the ashes of the old. The trial had been a crucible, burning away the last vestiges of the person I used to be. The constant scrutiny, the need for unwavering resolve, had forged something stronger in me. My little graphic design business, born of a need for distraction and income during the legal battle, had flourished. I'd found a niche creating brand identities for wellness and recovery-focused startups. The work was meaningful. I hired my first employee, then a second. My company, which I named Clarity Designs, was growing. I was finally financially stable, a feeling that was still so novel it felt like a luxury. My relationship with Uncle Ben was quiet and complicated. He had moved out of the care facility and into a small, assisted living apartment near Uncle Robert. The poison had left its mark. He had permanent nerve damage in his hands and feet, and a cognitive slowness that hadn't been there before. He remembered what Carol had done, but it was like a dream to him, hazy and disconnected. He rarely spoke of it. Our conversations were about simple things: the weather, a book he was reading, the progress of my company. There was a gulf between us, created by his illness and my knowledge of the full, sharp-edged truth. But there was love there, too. A quiet, wounded, but enduring love. I made peace with the fact that it was the best we could have. I continued with therapy, learning to manage the lingering trauma. The nightmares had mostly faded. I had established firm, non-negotiable boundaries with the family members who had sided with Carol. Some had tried to apologize after the verdict, offering flimsy excuses. "We just didn't want to believe it," they'd say. I would listen politely and then tell them I wished them well, but that a relationship was no longer possible. It wasn't about punishment. It was about self-preservation. I could not allow that kind of weakness, that willingness to believe the convenient lie, back into my life. My circle was smaller now, but it was solid. It was real. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a prison exchange prefix. My blood ran cold. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Is this Maya Evans?" a sterile, automated voice asked. "You have a collect call from an inmate at the Lowell Correctional Institution. To accept the charges, press 1. My heart hammered against my ribs. It had to be her. After nearly 2 years of silence, I pressed 1, my hand trembling. "Maya!" The voice was thin, reedy, stripped of all its former power and polish. It was Carol. "Maya, can you hear me?" "I can hear you," I said, my own voice surprisingly calm. I stood up and walked to the window of my office, looking down at the bustling street below. "Oh, thank God," she said, and then she started to cry. It wasn't the theatrical sobbing from the trial. It was the ugly, desperate sound of true despair. "Maya, I need your help." I said nothing. I just listened to the sounds of the prison in the background, a distant buzzer, the low murmur of other voices. "It's Kevin," she choked out. "My son. He's having such a hard time. He can't get a job, Maya. No one will hire him. The trial, my name, it's followed him everywhere. He lost his apartment. He's staying on a friend's couch. He's a good boy, Maya. He didn't do anything wrong. He just stood by his mother." I still said nothing. I thought of Kevin, sitting in that courtroom, staring at me with such contempt. I remembered the text messages he'd sent me before I blocked his number, calling me a vindictive bitch and a disgrace. He hadn't just stood by his mother. He had been her willing soldier. "He's good with computers," Carol pleaded, her voice cracking. "He's so smart. And I heard you have a company now, a successful one. He needs a chance, Maya. Just a chance. A job. Any job. An entry-level thing. Just to get back on his feet. Please. For the sake of the family." There it was. That word. Family. The word she had used to discard me like trash. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. She was calling me, the niece she had disowned and tried to destroy, from a prison phone, begging me to save the son who had enabled her. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't repentant. She was just out of options. She was trying to use me one last time. I took a deep breath, the air in my office feeling clean and cool. I looked at the logo on my wall, Clarity Designs. I had chosen that name for a reason. Carol, I said, and my voice was perfectly level, devoid of anger or pity. It was just the voice of a woman stating a fact. You told me once that family is a choice. You said I didn't meet your standard. You made your choice, and I have made mine. My choice is to protect myself and the life I have built. My choice is to surround myself with people who are safe and honest. Kevin is not one of those people. And you are not family anymore. I paused, letting the words hang in the air between my quiet office and her noisy prison. The answer is no. Do not call me again. And then, before she could respond, before she could plead or curse or bargain, I ended the call. I blocked the number. I stood at my window for a long time, watching the people on the street below, living their ordinary lives. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction of revenge, just a profound, quiet, and final sense of peace. The ghost was gone. The war was over. I was free.